I'm just here. I want to welcome those who are joining us online, and I want to give thanks, say thank you to Reneé Moore, vestry member who I think when she started her vestry term, this was the passion that she had, and it's been a while to bring it to life, and joined by a number of volunteers, the team that has been exploring St. George's history. So many thanks to Reneé and the team. She will tell you exactly who all those members are, and we look forward to just really getting a chance to see what they've put together. And then afterwards, I know that there'll be questions. There could be questions, or we want to open up for conversation and reflection. So as Reneé said at our vestry meeting, I can't necessarily promise to be able to answer all of the questions, but we certainly want to have an opportunity. What questions for us at St. George's come up from learning more about our history, and what might we want to explore further, if anything? So as you are looking at these things, please, note your questions, and let's share it and be able to have a conversation about who we are and who we have been for 150 years. So Reneé Moore, it's all yours.
Good morning, everyone. We're good on the mic? Okay, perfect. As Connie mentioned, this is something that I thought of, I guess, a couple of years ago, just to figure out the history, not only of St. George's, but, living in Bowie for the past 23 years. Finding about history is just fascinating, about where we come from, who we are. I'm first generation immigrant to the United States. My parents are from Guyana, so being here is all new to me as well, and learning about history. So this journey started about 2 years ago. Compiled it with a group of volunteers, which include Tim Dangle, Ian Richardson, Bill Martin, Helen and Lero, and Luella Tabor. And we would meet and discuss and try and figure out what we wanted to do for the history of St. George's. And we all had different interests about what we were searching for. My focus was on the land, seeing where it came from, how it became, how we acquired it. Helen's focus was on also the land previously to the Duvals owning it, and the original Native Americans, indigenous people who owned it. So this is still an ongoing process and a journey for us on trying to find out this information. We didn't find out a lot about that, so our journey continues, and here's our presentation. Thank you so much for helping, and thank you for being here. So St. George's began as a chapel of ease of Holy Trinity Episcopal Church of Collington, which was suspended operation recently as 23 years ago. And it was formed in 1844 by the division of the former Queen Anne Parish into Holy Trinity and St. Barnabas Church in present-day Upper Marlborough. St. George's was founded in 1873 after Edmund Bryce Duval, Carolyn Duval, and Rosalie Ogle. They deeded a lot in Glenville, as it was known then, to the vestry of Holy Trinity Parish. And Holy Trinity has wanted more for some years to establish a chapel of ease in its northern area, and the Duvals were in the process of selling lots in a new subdivision, and a cemetery was also established at the site. These are significant dates in St. George's history, which includes the congregation founded, the first chapel being built, which was 1873. 1888, the cyclone destroyed it. The new chapel was rebuilt and consecrated by the Bishop of Maryland. We try to find some history about why there was such a gap between the cyclone and the rebuilding of the church, so that's something we're still researching. In 1895, the Diocese of Washington was formed, which included Prince George's County. 1925, the chapel hall was built, and 1928, the hall used to house the Glendale Elementary School class. So on September 8th, 1873, Mr. Clark contracted an E.B. Duval of Holy Trinity. This was included in their vestry minutes, the meetings talking about the property and the Chapel of Ease of St. George's. Reverend Stephen Ting, he's a significant figure in 19th century American Christianity, and he's known for his evangelical zeal and his influence on the Episcopal Church. And he was a key figure in the establishment of St. George's. He was a New Englander born in Massachusetts, and he established his own church, St. George's, in New York City before coming to the District of Columbia and helping to fund the church grounds that St. George is on. And in 1823, he became the Prince George's County Rector as for the Queen Anne Parish, which he served 5 years, and he spent the next 17 years in the two parishes between Philadelphia and DC. You can, next slide, yeah. So the census of Prince George's County in 1860, the population was 23,327,000. So if you can look and see between the differences between the years of 1860, 1870, 1880, and 1890, you can see in 1870 is when the Black population falls due to the immigration and where they moved out of state to different parts of Maryland, other counties, and DC. And you could notice in 1860 that the difference between free slaves and those who were those who were enslaved and those who were free-born Blacks. So in 1872, Stephen Ting signifies his purpose to aid the vestry and the people in the erection of a church, which is near Huntington, and it was chiefly due to the efforts of Robert Bowie. Sorry, Bowie. I live in Bowie. I should be able to say that. I'm thinking David Bowie, but it's Bowie, Robert Bowie, who was an attorney of Cedar Hill. And Ting was known for his evangelical preaching style and his strong commitment to the principles within the Episcopal Church. And these are just samples of notes from the minutes in the vestry meetings. We will have all these documents available for everybody or anyone who's interested in looking at them. Again, this is acknowledgement in the vestry meetings of 1872 on July 22nd, where they talked about the continuing interest in erecting the chapel near Huntington. This is a transcript of handwritten of the transfer of St. George's Church from Holy Trinity to the Diocese of Maryland in 1873. A lot of it is, you can read some of it, but to decipher everything that it says. 1873, there's the chapel at Glenville, which it was known as then. The building was erected partially with funds raised by a former rector of Queen Anne Parish, St. Barnabas's Church, Dr. Stephen Ting. And while at Queen Anne, Ting had wanted to establish again the chapel of North of Holy Trinity, Chapel of Ease, but was unable, and he had raised money among congregants that contributed to purchase the property. There was some rumor that few parishioners believed that the property was given to St. George's, but that wasn't the case. So the original building was erected in 1873 when this parochial chapel was first organized, and it was demolished again by the storm brought on by the cyclone August 21st in 1988, and it was replaced by present frame building in 1892. It was consecrated on November 4th, great day, by the Bishop of Maryland, Dr. William Parrott, and the parish hall plain frame structure. And the first clergyman to serve the chapel was Reverend Dr. Harvey Stanley. So the chapel opens in July of 1873 for a divine service, and this included evening prayer with a sermon was to be held every alternate Sunday. The community, adjacent community in this area was predominantly Methodist in training, but most of them for that period of time didn't participate, but there was an interest once the chapel was erected. And so numbers increase. I guess, you know, it was manifested that this would happen. You build it, they will come. And so it appears the crowd increased with worship, and so they increased services. These are extracts relating to St. George's Chapel from the Trinity Parish Report to the Diocese of Maryland. These are the amounts of number of people sitting in the church, the estimated value of the chapel back in 1873, and it talks about the adjacent church property, and it also includes Holy Trinity and at Glenville, and the total contributions paid by Reverend Stephen Ting. So here is a list of rectors and vicars of St. George's Chapel, starting with Harvey Stanley from 1851 down to our current Connie Reinhardt. 1888, August 21st is when St. George's Chapel was destroyed by the tornado, which was spawned by a hurricane originally in Louisiana. And it was rebuilt on the same foundation in 1892 was when it was consecrated. But like I said, we're still trying to find out the history between the lapse of 1888 and rebuilding the church in 1892. The church was consecrated by the Right Reverend William Parrott, Bishop of Maryland, in 1892. And this was the path of the tornado. Hurricane, sorry. That too. It's all in the history. It's named everything, right? Yeah. Here's a copy of the Washington Post dated August 22nd. There's a brief article. It was hard to read. I believe it's this one that talks about a chapel being destroyed from the Mother Nature. Yeah. Yeah. Here's another article from the Evening Star. Thank you, Ian. He highlighted the actual comments from talking about the chapel that was destroyed also on August 22nd. So on August 28th, St. George's Chapel destruction was noted in the Holy Trinity vestry meetings, and it's a brief copy of the minutes. So St. George's, as we mentioned, was rebuilt on the same foundation and consecrated November 4th. Again, great day. Next Saturday, that would be an anniversary for when it was consecrated by Bishop Parrott and the ministry from Washington and Baltimore. Here's the census for the early 1900s in this area for Prince George's County. I believe they didn't start counting Glendale until maybe, I think, 1950s or after 1960s. We'll see it on the next one, but you can see as the population continues to grow, demographics, you can see the difference between the whites and the blacks, how the numbers drop continuously, how World War I revitalizes the tobacco industry in PG County, and you'll see the numbers continue to rise in population. So the early 1900s, the Chapel of Ease had services once or twice a month, and they used it as an education building as well. On Sundays, when the rector wasn't present, they used lay readers to lead the service. And like I said, there was additional interest in needs for meeting in social space as the congregation decided to build a small parish hall that was completed in 1925. This was funded by the diocese and then St. George's Guild and the congregation's women group. They used the hall for a local elementary school during the building, and it was a 2-room schoolhouse in Glendale. And that's a picture that we found, Ian found, of children and using the class at the chapel hall. So in 1958, Holy Trinity Parish determined that the chapel needed to be let go, and they were offered to the diocese as mission congregations. St. George's and St. James were yoked, and they shared the services of a priest, and that was Reverend William Myers, became the first vicar in 1960. Also that year, vicarage was built midway between the congregation on Lanham Severn Road. In July of 1968, St. George's and St. James, they were separated on the initiative of when the Bishop of Washington, the Right Reverend William Creighton, and the vicar, Reverend Dale Cooper Jr., remained with St. George's, and the vicarage was kept as well. And the congregation grew in this period, and expansion was considered by Father Cropper's leaving in 1960. This is a brief history of St. George's Chapel Hall. It wasn't certain when the idea of the hall first surfaced, but there was various records indicating in the years leading up to the construction in 1925 that funds were finally gradually raised to do so, and that the first record in the Guild meetings of a fundraising event to the building was in August 1921, and there's also later minutes recorded that they had a supper that raised $125. On October 2nd, 1924, the following motion was passed by the members of the Guild to leave to the Council of the Church that plans and the arrangement of the building for the parish hall was under construction. The groundbreaking was held in July of 1925 with the rector officiating. I believe the Guild minutes read, "A vote was taken, and it is the pleasure of the Guild to have the council go on with building of the hall." And the building, when completed, it was not to cost more than $2,000, but the actual cost in the parochial report of 1925 was $2,250. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So here are the significant dates of St. George's history listed from 1958 to 1998. I believe 1958, St. George's becomes the diocesan mission independent of Holy Trinity Parish, and the Reverend William Myers is the first vicar, jointly with St. George's of Bowie. And the vicarage, built halfway between the churches, as I mentioned, was sold. That was in 1999. Held it until 1999, sorry. And the Reverend Dale Cropper becomes the second vicar of yoked congregations. There's the sharing of the vicars between the two churches, and it ended in 1968. The Reverend Harry Harper becomes the third vicar. 1973, the chapel completely is renovated to celebrate the congregation centennial. And the Reverend Ralph Evans becomes the fourth vicar in 1974. Robert Stevenson becomes the fifth vicar in 1982. Reverend Ron Swanson becomes the sixth vicar, and Michael Hopkins becomes the seventh vicar in 1990. St. George's was awarded major funding for new building by the diocese in 1998. Here's the population census for 1970. So it was, I believe, 1980 is when Glendale population was started, their first census. So you can see the numbers in 1970, 660,000, percentage 85% white, 13%, 0.9 black. And you see how it changes. It dropped significantly. As you can see, the numbers in Glendale population was 5,100, predominantly white with 74%, black 21%, Asian 1.7%, American Indian, as they were called back then, we prefer to call them indigenous people, Alaskan heritage 0.12%, Hawaiian Pacific Islander 0.06%, and others 0.74%. So you could see 10 years later, from 1980 to 1990, the significant jump in the transformation of Black residents become the majority. They label it race, but Race is a social construct, so we'll stick with the ethnicity in PG County. That it is. So it jumps, you can see, it flipped, actually. The white population went from 58.9 to a Black population of 50.7% in 1990, and whites went 43.1%. Sorry, that should probably be Asian at 3.8%, other 2%. Glendale population continues to increase, and you can see the white population is 68.9%, Black population 21%, Asian 7.2%, Hispanic for the first time we see in 1990 2.76%, Indigenous people in Alaskan 0.31%, Hawaiian Pacific Islander is 0.2%, other is 0.61%. So the demographics you'll see have changed significantly in the past 50, 60 years. And we had questions about that too, conversations with Ian about the demographics of where St. George's is in the representation within the church. So something to think about. So here's just a picture of St. George's Chapel in 1972.
There was a fence.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of our husband's ambition was to get rid of that fence. Separating it from the community. So one of the first things Michael did was to take that fence down.
Well, St. George's, all are welcome if you can get through our fence.
Yes, that's right. But I have a gate for that fence in our house, I think, anyway.
So November of 1973, this is the signing of the chapel restoration contract. December of 1973, there were restorations made on the chapel.
That was the last time the roof was done.
Don't jinx it, Ed.
So we're in the 70s now. May of 1976 is the Glendale Bicentennial Parade. Found a picture of Reverend Ralph Evans with the St. George's float.
Is that the other thing there in the back?
Beautiful picture of the chapel in December of 1988. Inside of the chapel of Christmas of 1988. This is the dedication of the new altar in November of 1988 at the chapel.
Hey, that banner looks familiar.
We made that actually. The book group made it. Yeah, we made that. When Ron Swanson was here, I think it's still going strong.
1990, Reverend Michael Hopkins takes over from the interim Reverend Randall Day. He was called as the vicar, and he began his ministries here part-time with a small band of spirited folks. Do we have anyone in the audience who was there? Remember? Ian, yeah. And the congregation met the requirements to be made a parish of the diocese in 1998. And they began the 4-year process to achieve that status. Here it is, 1998, St. George completes the canonical requirements for parish status. Here is a copy of the program for the 125th anniversary, September 3rd, 1998. Beautiful cakes. Don't know if anybody here had a hand at that. See, okay, they were there, present. Okay. So on September 26, 1999, 2 weeks after the Sesquicentennial St. George's bid farewell to the chapel hall. This was decided, the original building built in 1925, and so they would build this property, this building, these facilities, where this was located exactly next door to the chapel, or the cemetery. November 20th, 1999, there's the groundbreaking service for the new church. I believe the bishop was present.
And that rope there actually represents the outline of the present building. With a rope out round, and we all, just to show us the actual where it was going.
Renee, would you mind repeating that comment so the folks on Zoom can hear, or what Ian said?
Oh.
Ian, would you
The rope represents the outline of where the building would have been built, sorry, at that time. Yep. These are additional significant dates from 1958 to 1998 that we've been discussing. So in 2000, Chapel Hall is demolished to make way for the new building, and the congregation's growth continues to grow, and it allows to begin the application for parish status. In 2001, the new St. George is consecrated by Bishop of Washington, Jane Holmes Dixon. In 2002, St. George's admitted as Glendale Parish in the Union with the Convention of the Diocese of Washington, D.C., and Michael Hopkins becomes the first rector. And in 2006, the Reverend Constance Reinhardt is called as the second rector of St. George's. Here's the census for 2000, 2010, and 2020. You can see how the population is now over 800,000 people. Blacks at 62.7%, whites at 27%, Asians at 3.9%, other at 3.4%. In 2000 in Glendale, the population was 12,609. The population had increased by 30%. Black residents replaced whites as the majority ethnicity in 2000. And you can see the numbers for Glendale, how they continue to increase every year. Every 10 years for the county, as well as the Glendale population. As the last census in 2020, Glendale population is 14,698. The blacks 60%, whites 13%, Asians 5.7%, Hispanic, Latinos 15%, Indigenous people, Alaskan 0.1%, Hawaiian Pacific Islander 0.1%, and other 3.3%. So here are pictures of 2000, the bishop groundbreaking service, the land when the building was completely removed and excavated, ready to build. And that was the groundbreaking ceremony and service at St. George's. Forgot to mention that services during that time when the building was being built, some services were held in the parking lot across the street. There are some pictures. Karen, where are you? Karen's not in here? Okay, there's pictures of Karen as an acolyte holding the cross. Yeah.
Yeah, the church office, most of the operations went across to what is now the place for daycare across the street there. Yeah. Originally a Highs area, and then they vacated it, and then the builder and the church office all moved across there. So we had Sunday school in there, and so it was sort of unofficial. We got permission to do it, I understand. But anyhow, we just sort of told to keep quiet, but just make sure we were discreet, coming, going, and going.
Fun fact: Marilyn Tosser-Yang was baptized in the cemetery because there was no room.
Wow. That is interesting. So on May 19, 2001, St. George's New Church consecration service happened. Welcome to the Diocese of Washington, D.C. St. George's was made a parish of the Diocese of Washington in 2002 with the Reverend Michael Hopkins as its first rector of St. George's, and again with Connie Reinhardt beginning her ministry here in 2006. In the fall of 2011, St. George's achieved a lifetime goal of putting stained glass windows in the sanctuary. These are pictures of Reverend Michael Hopkins' farewell in September of 2004. In 2005, on March 27th, the St. George's Chapel is declared a historic site in Prince George's County without the fence. 2006, again, significant year for St. George's. Connie Reinhardt was called as the second rector of St. George's Church. And St. George's, this is who we are. We welcome all. We're inclusive community, and we're people from many places, diverse places. We are diverse people. It's always important to recognize the importance of being diverse and accepting everyone. We're all different, and that's what makes this church who it is. I've been a member now probably almost 6 years, or about 6 years, and that's one of the things that brought me to this church. Not only that, and that Connie knew my name at communion from just meeting her. That's always something that that stands out. You know, not many people can do something like that, and for her to remember every person she meets the day of, and then at communion, it's impressive. But I'm glad yeah. Glad to be a member, glad to say join us all around the table where all are welcome. I feel welcome, and I'm thankful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. This is a list of St. George's values on the website as well. Love, St. George's strives to be a community of love where all people are welcomed without judgment and invited into a circle of care and support. We serve. St. George's believes it is our mission to serve others as Jesus did. And so we strive to show mercy and do justice wherever and whenever we can. We pray. St. George's encouraged people to grow closer to God and to know Jesus more deeply through prayer, meaningful and joyful worship, and the study of Scripture. We continue to grow. St. George's commits to sharing the message of God's love with others and encouraging all to grow in their faith. These are a list of references. I take credit for none of this. If folks are interested, I'm sure we'd be willing to share the Google Drive, all the documents that we have and continue to build. As I mentioned, this is a journey. It's continuous. There's so much to learn about not only the church, but the land that it sits upon. Special thank you to our research committee. Thank you again. Now, if there are questions and answers, I will leave that to Ian and Bill Martin.
I have a question, and it might be on other people's minds, but, part because, Reneé and I have talked over the last couple of years. Reneé, I know when you started this project, one of the interests was to learn if the, building of St. George's and how it might have overlapped with slavery. Could you speak to that for us?
In the research that I found, I couldn't find anything about slavery or who built the church. Marietta property, as everybody knows, extended this whole block all the way up to Marietta House, for the longest property owned by the Duvals. And for me, that's part of my journey that still continues. Yeah, there's lots of history in the enslavement of Black Americans, and no, so I didn't want to include something that I couldn't find information that they had anything to do with building of this property. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I maybe a word on that, because that also,
I'm just gonna ask everybody
sorry.
to ask your question at the microphone, because that way the people who are online, still people on Zoom, Michael,
Yes.
can hear, otherwise they can't hear us. So Bill, is it possible to get to the microphone?
There are two microphones, you don't want to separate it.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Pull it around,
I think, Connie, it's a highly pertinent question, and I've had some discussion with Renee about it, and we did not find specific tie-ins. I didn't. Part of this was my responsibility here to try to dig into. I did not find specific tie-ins with the founding of St. George's, but it's there in the background. It's there in the background of Holy Trinity. It's there in the background of the Episcopal Church during that era. And there's much to be said about it. It's not directly tied in right here. Let me mention two things about it. There are two figures here that in some ways suggest a polarity on this very issue. One was Harvey Stanley, who was the longest serving rector of Holy Trinity, served throughout the Civil War, and was present at the consecration of the St. George's Chapel. And the second, as Renee was talking about, was Stephen Ting, who also was a rector at the predecessor parish for Holy Trinity. In fact, was the first occupant of the rectory that is still there, that was built in the 1820s. He was there as a young man and raised, he and his wife had their first child there in the rectory that is still standing on the Holy Trinity campus, and he was a New Englander. There is a very interesting book which is you can find it online. It was a compilation of his letters and Stephen Ting's letters and his journal entries and a number of things like this. It was published in 1880, 1890 something by his son, who was also a prominent Episcopal priest. And privately, especially in correspondence with his father, Stephen King was shocked by what he saw in slavery here in Prince George's County. Of course, it was tobacco plantations, it was tobacco field labor, and he was shocked by that whole system, though he said he probably saw slavery here in Prince George's County in one of its mildest forms. It was much worse in other places, but in this form, it shocked him greatly, and is one reason why he wanted to leave Prince George's County, first to Philadelphia and then to Manhattan, where he did become a nationally prominent figure in the Episcopal Church. His heart still stayed in this area in a way. He still had emotional connections here, and that did lead him to play the role that Renee has described in the founding of St. George's, and we are the namesake of his congregation in Manhattan, which still exists. So it's been combined with a couple of other parishes there. The other figure, as I say, is Harvey Stanley, who was a pretty prominent Confederate sympathizer during the war. And there's pretty good historical evidence that he actively was on the side of the Confederates, did various things to aid Confederate spies making their way across Maryland into Virginia after they'd had other tasks elsewhere. They tried to return to Confederate lines through Maryland and then across the Potomac. And there is pretty decent historical evidence that that he aided them, and there's pretty good evidence that he was a solid Confederate sympathizer, as many were in this part of the state. These two men came together at the consecration of St. George's. What did they have to say to each other? Be interesting to know, but I don't. There's no evidence that I'm available that is available to me that I've seen, that I've been able to find, says anything about it. I should add for Ting, he also gave a nationally well-publicized sermon from his pulpit in New York City in, I believe, 1858 or thereabouts, for emancipation, which was unusual in the Episcopal Church at the time. And so he came out on that side of it. I don't think Harvey Stanley would have been on that side of it. So that issue's there, and it's all in the, certainly in the background here, but it didn't directly tie in any way that I'm aware of to the founding to the founding of St. George's. And one other thing I will say is I think the Episcopal Church in general and St. George's in particular is a wonderful example about how people can transcend, institutions can transcend their founding and their roots and grow and come, in my view, much truer to a realization of the ideals of the gospel. I mean, I say this in all sincerity. That's what I see in St. George's, and so there's all this stuff in the background. And the Episcopal Church, in my opinion, did not have the most honorable history during the period of the Civil War and the whole history of slavery. But by golly, have we transcended that and moved on and become a denomination I'm proud to be a member of myself.
Thank you, Bill. We're gonna open to questions. I just want to make one, because Bill's referenced the Episcopal Church in regards to slavery. And so the official position of the Episcopal National Church at that time was not to take a position. And so there were churches who were, in support of the Confederacy and slavery, held slaves, and then there were churches that didn't, and of course there's a lot of north-south split there. But anyway, that is our history, and so it sounds like we have more to learn, which is always a good thing, and I appreciate the attention, and I know that was an important question, probably more than just me had. So, Michael, you have a question?
Yeah. Well, one further thing on this as well is that the Episcopal Diocese of Washington has formed a reparations committee and is doing research into, the role that slavery did play in the early days of the diocese, and well, even, for the parishes that were there, before, when they were the Diocese of Maryland before they became the Diocese of Washington. So it is still ongoing work, and there may be more that we learn, not just from what we have done, but what may also, come from the diocese as well.
I will speak on that and say I've participated on those calls as well. They're the first Saturday of every month, and all the churches in the diocese, those who are interested in this, they are doing the history and the research for their own churches. And I believe they had a presentation last October, and they'll have another on different churches. And now that our research is partially done, we might join that for the next one. Yeah.
So on a different topic, I was just wondering if anybody knows why there was such a high turnover of vicars from the 60s or the 80s. Is it just like standard for vicars to turn over that often, or was there like some contention going on?
I don't think we know.
You don't think you know?
The people who were around that time have left us, unfortunately, and there's a whole bit of the history that we don't really haven't got any. We're looking at fundamental records and trying to pick up, find the reports and so on, but we don't really know.
Yeah. So for people on Zoom, Ian said that we don't really know. A lot of the people who were around during that time have moved on, but they're still looking through records to try and figure out the answer to that.
And the history primarily that Michael Hopkins wrote, which a lot of is drawn from, because he had a really good handle on that, does mention in one or two of the vicar transitions that there was a desire for growth and building, and there was a lot of tension with that. And I'm extrapolating, I'm not saying facts, but just what I sense is that, of course, with growth comes change, and there was, it sounds like from reading and knowing a little bit of the history, that the tension between we want to grow, which means that there would have to build, and we want to stay as we are in the little community in our little chapel, and that did cause some of the tension. And I know at least one vicar, I can't remember which one, did leave over tension for that specific reason. But of course, there's also lots of personal reasons and valid reasons. And remember, the priest was here and at St. James for a number of years and back and forth, doing both services. So that could have something to do with it.
That was a big tension when we proposed to build this building, because there were people
Yeah.
Keep it to the chapel. And I
And-
think the design here is actually, the church is designed so that the maximum distance from the altar is about the same here as it is in the chapel. That was the design.
Ian was saying the same tension was present when the congregation in the late 1990s was working on and eventually, had the movement to build this building, that there was concern that some people wanted it to stay the small chapel that it was, and so Ian said that, and I did not know this, it's kind of cool, that the maximum length of the altar from the back of the new church, our church building, in the sanctuary is the same as the maximum distance from the altar at the chapel to the back. And so the way it's designed, where the altar is, that it means that it really is making this, this closeness, and that's physical is meant to represent, it's very symbolic. Thank you for sharing that, Ian, I did not know that. Anybody else who has a question, please come on up, or if if those of you just kind of listening and have a comment or a reflection about what this history says, please come forward. I'm looking at you, Joanne. I know you have some observation you would like to make.
So besides Ian and Rosa and Jermaine, and maybe Julia, well, of course, the Hazeltons, I think I might be one of the longest standing St. George's members. So a little bit about our history. If you probably heard this story, but if you haven't, it makes Connie laugh every single time, so I'm going to say it now. When I was married to my first husband, David, we were looking for a parish because I was pregnant, and we shopped. And he found online St. George's website. He's like, I think I found the church for you because the values are very inclusive. And Michael Hopkins was an advocate for LGBT rights in the church. And so we came, and I was like, oh, this is really nice, but it's so tiny, and there aren't any kids, and the whole reason we're coming back to church is for children. So then we shopped. We went to a number of different parishes, and I don't remember what number it was, but in the middle of the service, Dave looked at me and he said, if we leave right now, we can get to St. George's. And so everybody got up, and they were going forward for communion. We got up and we left, and then we have been members ever since. Marilyn, as I mentioned, was baptized in the cemetery because it was that building transition. When Lee, the oldest, was baptized and David was received, it was in the chapel. And there's this story of the fact that one of the acolytes set another acolyte's robe on fire. Something interesting about that if you know my son Lee. And Dave, who is a firefighter, right? Very interesting. But one of the beautiful things about St. George's is truly a community that makes the circle ever wider. Everyone is welcome. And one of the things I love about St. George's is our willingness to self-reflect and struggle with our own biases. And we saw that when Michael left and we were searching for Connie, we had to figure out who we were at that time and how we were going to evolve. And then that happened again when St. James was going to close, and the diocese suggested that they approach St. George's for merger. And that was a very challenging time because St. George's believed ourselves to be incredibly inclusive and open, but St. James was a different type of open and inclusion, one that allowed their children to just walk around the service, allowed the children to get up and come and actually hold up the gifts during the service, and did not make their children be quiet during the service, which for traditional Episcopalians is a no-no. a big no-no. You go to the cry room and you go outside and you don't let your children disturb the service, right? And that was a perfect example of how we grew. Because then St. George's had to say, you know what, everybody's welcome, right? We had to look at our own biases. And so, and during that time, we had to also look at who we were racially, ethnically, and we weren't as diverse as we are now. And we had to say, why is that? How are we going to change? How are we serving the local community? So no place is perfect, but what I really appreciate about St. George's is in our beautiful imperfection, we are willing to engage. And that, I don't know if that's always been, but it's definitely been since Michael was here. And so I give great thanks to God for calling him and for calling Carly. So thanks.
Questions, comments, observations anyone wants to make? Anybody have any questions? Dan?
Well, I just wanted to first thank the group for doing it, because this is a really good resource both for now and the future. And I hope this will end up, if it's not already, on our website. But I'm also curious, we have a cemetery. So where did the cemetery fall in all this? And, you know, maybe that's a whole separate thing. But I was just curious, was there any research done on that? Thanks.
Lots of old maps, actually, and you can see it.
We've got some old maps actually of well, that's not readable. There are a lot of maps that have the families that lived in the area, and we have the farms and so on. And I can see lots of names there that are actually in our cemetery. Alpha Vermilion is one I think of. So one thing I wanted to do actually is go through, look at these local maps and tie them up with the names that are in the cemetery here, and we can, you know, see where these people lived who are here in our cemetery. But so that's, I think that's one thing we should do. I'd say one thing that Reneé didn't really mention is why are we here, and that's because of the railway. Because the story was that people they wanted to put a line between Washington and Baltimore, but the people in the state up in Baltimore didn't want a line going to Washington because it would take their trade away. So but they did get permission to put a line between Baltimore and Annapolis. There's a stipulation there; no branch line could be more than 20 miles long. So they built the line to Washington to Annapolis, but of course between I guess it's really Old Bowie up here. Old Bowie and Washington is less than 20 miles. So they were able to do a branch line from Bowie down to Washington, and that completed the line between Washington and Baltimore. It was all done by a bit of trickery. But anyhow, they built a station at Glenville, as it was then, just where the crossing was. And that was really why we're here, because that station was built there, and Duval said, okay, we'll build a community around the station. So that's why we're here, and why St. George's is here, because you know, it was originally part of the first part of the community. It was built. Of course, unfortunately, when they closed the line here, I think it was in 1986, it really divided the church from its community. I mean, I've been in Glendale for 25 years now. My wife grew up here. She's the third generation Glendanian. And Glendale, actually, on the other side of the tracks, is a really nice, close-knit community. We have the sort of centers around, historically centered around St. George's and the Methodist Church up in Springfield Road, the USD Agricultural Center, which unfortunately is closed now, and the old tuberculosis hospital, and also the fire department, which is still going. And those are sort of the centers of the community in Glendale. And it's really, so my wife's family lived here for generations and generations. It's been a really neat community. They all talk of each other as cousins, you know, a lot of them are related, but it's been a really close-knit community. And I think in some ways, history of St. George's really reflects that the closeness of the Glendale community over the many centuries and so on. And long may it last.
Helen, I see that your hand is up, so if you'd like to unmute and speak.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Newport Richey. I am commenting about the earlier question in regards to slavery. Edmund Bryce Duval sold Lot 8, which is the land that the building is actually on. And he was the last slaveholder. He had 22 slaves. One escaped. I do not know what happened to those 22 after the Civil War. I do not know what his life was like during the Civil War, Edmund Bryce. I do know that Marcus, his younger brother, was arrested for being a slave or a spy for the Confederates. And there is paperwork, I've seen it, that he was to hand over when he was taken to prison. Edmund visited him. I've seen his signature for visiting him in prison. That doesn't say anything about Edmund, and I have a suspicion he played the line. So I don't know what that playing of the line involved. I don't know where he was with the involvement with the war, how he got away with not fighting, that or he paid someone off. There's a lot of things that could have been involved with. So I wanted to clarify that part when in concern to the slavery issue in the beginning. I also made another comment, I can't remember now, in the comment thing for the Zoom link, but that's pretty much that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Any final questions that people have? All right, well, Michael, do you have a question?
I'll bring up one more comment from Zoom. So this comment came from Russ, and he said, "This has been a very thorough and impressive presentation. Thank you so much to the team who clearly dedicated many hours and much effort to their research and preparation. Well done."
And not only is November 4th the consecration of the new building in 1892, it's also Renee's birthday. So we did a blessing at 8 o'clock service, but Renee, we will wish you blessings for the new year, for your new year. And many thanks to everybody for being here, for listening. We will put the presentation online, so there'll be more information. And we know that we have some more things to explore, so we'll look forward to hearing more and learning more about, St. George's. And of course, we're continuing to write St. George's history, so thank you all for your part in that. So. And thank you to Michael and Roy for their work on the tech. Woohoo!